Welcome, everyone, and thank you for coming out on this one of our very few sunny afternoons of the spring. So I appreciate what a sacrifice this is. Towards the end of 2020, I started seeing news articles about how our electrical grid might one day be revolutionized by millions of electric vehicles as a kind of gigantic national battery. Like other cars, EVs are generally off the road most of the time. The idea was that if they were left plugged in, small amounts of power could be available from each one, and through some kind of magic, that power could be used to manage grid loads more efficiently. 4 years ago, it all sounded very far off and fantastically complicated. But today, the idea has grown and matured to include other household devices that can be aggregated into what are called virtual power plants. And you might hear some more about that tonight, or VPPs. These devices can be orchestrated to deliver a wide array of benefits to the energy system. A recent report by Rocky Mountain Institute said the benefits of VPPs have gone from speculative to demonstrated. And state legislatures and regulators are taking action to bring them to their constituents. Last year, 10 state legislatures adopted VPP bills. Regulators in 4 states and the District of Columbia advanced VPP policies, and utilities in 34 states and Puerto Rico initiated or expanded VPP programs. If this all sounds too futuristic, I'd like to introduce you to my 8-year-old iPhone. Its current operating system comes with a setting called Clean Energy Charging. Probably yours does too, which is turned on by default. As my phone tries to explain to me, quote, it gets a forecast of carbon emissions from your local energy grid and uses it to charge your iPhone during times of cleaner energy production. Think about that. It means that almost everyone in this room is carrying around a little VPP in their pocket. Before we get started, I'd like to ask you all to make a phone call to Senator Susan Collins as soon as possible. As many of you are aware, there is an attempt to take away the renewable energy tax credits in the budget reconciliation that's before the Senate now. The bill passed the House to take away energy credits. If it happens in the Senate, it will be disastrous for renewable energy. Susan Collins is in a position of incredible power in the Senate as a swing vote on a vote that's going to be very, very tight. So the more phone calls she gets, the better. But we're here this evening to hear about the next step in the transformative technology of VPPs. Please welcome Seth Hadel and Jay Sriranka, who will tell us about the Maine Transactive Energy Pilot from Post Road Foundation. Thank you. Thanks, Doug.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Doug, for the introduction and for arranging this great afternoon. We can talk about this project, and thank you all for your perspective interest. So let me share this. Oh, no, I already shared that. So I'm going to tell you about, for the next 20 minutes or so, about the Maine Transactive Energy Pilot and how it can be a tool to advance demand flexibility in Maine. I've got sort of 3 parts to my presentation. First, I'll tell you a little bit about Post Road. You probably aren't familiar with us, so I'll share of that. It's myself is here from Post Road, and Jay Sriranka there in the back as well. Yeah. Is it not sharing? It is not. Apologies. All right. How's that? Is this shared now? Okay. We worked it out. So I'll divide my presentation in 3 parts. I'll tell you a little bit about Post Road, a little bit more about why demand flexibility can help Maine. As Doug mentioned, you can think of this as a virtual power plant, lots of ways of thinking about it, but there is a real opportunity for demand flexibility to be a tool to help Maine meet its energy needs and energy goals. And then I'll share with you about the Maine Transactive Energy Pilot, which is the pilot project that we're seeking to launch here in the next month or two. So first, a bit about Post Road. So we're a nonprofit dedicated to helping communities build sustainable infrastructure. And our unique spin on that is that we help communities build fiber optic networks that can be used for broadband access and also for other applications like grid modernization. So we spend about half our time on broadband networks and about half our time on this project and the technology that this represents. We chose this combination in part because of the interest of our Post Road, the team, the people that's there, but also in part to the origin of our name. So we call ourselves the Post Road Foundation because in the 18th century, at the time of the nation's founding, the founding fathers thought that post roads as infrastructure was essential to the nation's economic and social development. And for that reason, they gave Congress explicit authority to fund post roads. And it's the only infrastructure that's explicitly mentioned in the US Constitution because they felt that it was so important at that time. And now we don't use post roads, we use fiber optic networks. But we at Post Road Foundation think the same, that connectivity, the modern connectivity, is that essential to the nation's economic and human development. And so that's the origin of our name, and that's why we focus on connectivity and then these applications that can benefit from using that connectivity. So we help communities develop the fiber optic networks. I can brag a little bit about that. And then we develop this technology. So the two projects that I'll brag about, we have a fiber project we facilitated in Memphis and a fiber project that we facilitated in Selma, Alabama. It's about $1 billion of capital investment that we've helped facilitate. We're a very small nonprofit, but we punch above our weight for that reason. We don't have $1 billion, by the way, just to be clear. It'll be really a transformative project in this part of the country. It will leapfrog these communities from being some of the least connected to some of the most connected. So we're very excited about that. It's just getting started. The construction is just now underway this first half of the year. Now you might think, well, that's a little tangential to what we're talking about with demand flexibility, but we think that there's actually a long-term opportunity to combine these two types of infrastructure. You can imagine that demand flexibility programs like what I'm talking about here could actually be integrated into the broadband network. So you could have plug and play type systems. You could go to Home Depot, you could buy your equipment for whatever you need, bring it home, turn it on, connects to the broadband network automatically, and then you're automatically enrolled. So that's sort of the vision where we want to head towards. But we're not there yet. First, we've got to start small. So as I said, we're a very small nonprofit, but we're really fortunate to have great key relationships that are moving this forward. Like Climate to Thrive, and Beth is here, has been essential to helping us. Doug and your team have been essential for getting this meeting and spreading the interest. We're also working with the York Ready for Climate Action organization down in York. Also have some great organizations nationwide who are helping us. A great relationship with Berkeley Lab as part of the larger project. Hitachi helped us to design the user app, which you can have an example of. We have a few iPads in the back on the way out. You can try out. Tell us what you think. And then we're working with Pacific Northwest National Lab, who's helping us with cybersecurity. We've had a long-standing relationship with Efficiency Maine Trust to help launch us on this effort many years ago. And you might be wondering how we're funded. We're very lucky and fortunate to be funded by the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, and by the Department of Energy. So this project, believe it or not, actually got started in October of 2021 when we were awarded a grant from the Department of Energy. We had some great press here in Maine. It sounds like a long time ago. We have been working on it since then, but that first 12 months I don't think counts because it took 12 months for the Department of Energy to decide that even though we had won the grant, it took them 12 months to say that we could actually spend any money and do some work. So it's about 3 years, maybe 2.5 or 3 years that we've been working on it. Now, I'll tell you a little bit about the grid and why we're interested in pushing this forward, why we think it's a good thing for Maine. So for those of you who don't think about energy all the time like we do, the grid has these sections. There's the transmission system, which is connected to the generators. You see there on the left column. Now we have solar and wind, we have hydropower, nuclear, and natural gas. That energy feeds to the transmission system, to the distribution system, which then feeds to your homes and businesses, which consume the energy. Of course, it used to be that the power would only flow one way. Now there are times where some of that solar that's produced on your buildings could potentially flow to other buildings or flow back to the grid. I have here on the far left column the fuel mix in New England. This is interesting. It's about half of the electricity in New England is generated by burning natural gas, about a quarter from nuclear, a little under 10% is from Canada, a little under 10% is hydro, and the balance is solar and wind. Solar and wind is still small, but growing rapidly. But it's really amazing if you had generated that bar chart 10 years ago or 20 years ago, you would have had a lot of coal and oil. So the coal is gone in New England to the benefit of all the air that we breathe. So why do MTEP now? Well, there's 4 trends, some of which are related and some of which are sort of coincidental, that gives us reason to try something like this today. The first is that the grid is congested. Meaning we have a grid that's big enough for the energy consumption that we consume today, but it's almost right at capacity. And I have slides on each of these points to explain a little bit more detail. The second trend is that the congestion is expected to worsen. We want to electrify heating in Maine. We want to electrify transport in Maine. Both of those things are going to drive up electricity consumption. You may also want to install air conditioners due to climate change, which you haven't had in the past. That will also drive up consumption. And that then increase in consumption is going to make the peaks go higher.
Oh, nice.
I have a slide to explain
Yeah, there's like
sort of unrelated, but a trend that's happening at the same time. Solar and wind power is increasingly unused because of the congestion, because of the mismatch between when solar is generated and wind is generated, and when the electricity is actually needed. There are times, and there are increasing times, when that power is not used, which is really a missed opportunity. And then I don't need to remind you, electricity costs are going up nationwide. Your costs have gone up a lot here in Maine.
But I did not test it properly.
It's like 50, 60 cents a kilowatt hour. It's just outrageous.
When I had like
in California, it's almost cheaper to disconnect from the grid in parts of California. It's so expensive. So what does grid congestion mean? Well, grid congestion, you can think of it like traffic. So, and I don't have a picture of Highway 3 on Mount Desert Island. I could only find a picture, of a freeway in LA, but hopefully you remember, this is what it's like outside of this beautiful part of the country. So the existing grid infrastructure, just like roads, can only provide so much energy at peak times. So just like roads get congested at rush hour, the grid can get congested at those hot, humid summer afternoons in Boston. And so it can't move any more energy. And also, just like roads, the expense of that infrastructure is set by the need to meet that peak demand. So the civil engineers build roads for that rush hour. They don't build roads for the middle of the night when there aren't any cars. It's the same with the electric grid. The engineers build the grid for that peak demand, that hottest, humidest, most humid day in Boston in the summer. And that's the expense. In Maine, as I mentioned, the grid is adequate, but it's really near capacity. This isn't unique to Maine. There are lots of parts of the country that are like this. This is a map of distribution circuits. The red is circuits that have limited hosting capacity. This is a hosting capacity for new solar, but it's the same. It's highly correlated to the amount of capacity it would have for new loads. And so you can see there's a lot of parts of Maine that would be challenged by aggressive increases in electricity consumption. In fact, that total consumption is expected to double by 2050 to go from 10 terawatt hours up to over 27 terawatt hours. That's all driven by electrification of transport and heating. And because of that, the peak is supposed to actually triple without programs like MTEP by 2050. And that peak, because you have to build, just like with the roads, because you have to build the size of the capacity to meet that peak, it actually determines half of your utility bill. So half of your utility bill is for the energy, half of it is just for the size of, or the amount of copper or substations you need to meet that demand. So it's very important to bring that down. The other trend, as I mentioned, solar and wind, there's a missed opportunity. It's going unused. This chart is sort of a proxy for that. So believe it or not, there are many hours in the year that the electricity prices in ISO New England are actually negative. The producers will pay people to take the electricity from them. That's sort of a market failure. It's an idiosyncratic why that occurs. But it also means that there are times when there isn't enough load to take that power, right? There's power being wasted. And that the amount is going up. So whereas there's about 50 hours in 2015, in 2024, there are almost 500 hours of the year when electricity prices were negative. It's a missed opportunity to manage some of these trends. And I already mentioned costs are rising. You probably all are familiar with that. Part of it is the trends that we're discussing. Part of it is other issues. You see the bump in 2022. That was the Russian invasion of Ukraine, making natural gas prices go up. So then what about demand flexibility? Well, it is a low-cost tool to manage these trends. Let me explain that. So what does that mean? Well, demand flexibility is just meaning we're going to shift consumption from periods of high cost and demand to periods of low cost and demand. If you look at the traffic analogy, that's like taking cars at rush hour, the morning rush hour, and making the move either to the early morning or perhaps to lunchtime. And so if you could do that, you could actually move more cars over your existing roads than you otherwise would. Now, it is hard, maybe not as hard after the pandemic, but it's hard to get people to move when they go to their job or when your kids go to school. That you can't change. But with new technology enabled by thermal storage, battery storage, software, and modern communication networks, we can move when energy is moving over the grid. In fact, it's probably easier to move when energy moves over the grid than when cars move over roads. And what would that do? Well, because we can move the energy away from those peak times, it means that more energy, more electricity can be moved over our existing infrastructure than it otherwise would. It also means that if you build new infrastructure, that new infrastructure will have sort of give you more bang for your buck than otherwise, because you can move more energy over that new infrastructure than you otherwise would. And it's unlikely, since demand may triple, it's unlikely that demand flexibility is a silver bullet that's going to solve all our problems, but it can be a tool to help manage these costs. In part, we may just need to build less electrical grid infrastructure, but in part, it's also that if you have something like demand flexibility, you can time when you build that infrastructure better. And whenever you can sort of add to your planning time, you can reduce your costs. It's like if you need to repair in your house, it's almost always cheaper to do it in advance than to wait until the pipes break or you have to do something on an emergency. The same technology that lets us move the energy consumption to use the grid better also can be used to better match with solar and wind production, to use those times where we have excess solar and wind more effectively. Sometimes it's difficult to estimate exactly how much we'd save, but there are studies that suggest that for every 1 gigawatt of avoided peak infrastructure in 2050, that would save $1.5 billion. So it's not an insignificant sum. So then let me tell you about this project and how we're trying to advance load flexibility with it. The Maine Transactive Energy Pilot. Obviously an engineer or scientist named this effort. It was not a marketing person. So you'll have to forgive us for that. So demand flexibility has actually been around for quite some time. And there's, in this chart or this graph, I've got two different approaches. One approach is what we call the conventional command and control approach. And this is where the utility decides what your devices do. And this is an approach that's actually been used for decades. The example would be water heater demand response programs. Decades ago, the utilities would actually install a switch on your resistive electric water heater, and they would then turn off the heating elements in that water heater when there wasn't enough power on the grid to power that. And you may have gotten some incentive for that, or you may not have, but you didn't have any choice in the matter when they did it, and they did it regardless of how much hot water was in the tank. The advantage, and there's modern programs now for thermostats where they'll change your thermostat set point. The advantage of the command and control approach from the utility's perspective is that they know it works and it's easy to implement. It's very easy to install a switch that they can turn off. The disadvantage is that building occupants often don't like it. Like, people don't really like the utility changing their thermostat when they don't know about it, or changing their water heater when they don't know how much hot water is in it. So our approach is different, and that's that instead of telling your devices what to do, we ask you, what are you willing to let your devices do? So you tell us how willing you are to respond to the grid needs, and we'll adjust your devices based on that. But you are the one that makes that first choice. You could decide, I will contribute to the grid if there's almost a blackout, but otherwise don't bother. Or you could say, I'm gung-ho for demand flexibility, and Doug, you probably would be one of those. Do whatever you want to support the grid. That's great. We would like both perspectives. Both are useful to the grid. As I'll show you as well, we have a pause button so that if your mother-in-law comes to visit, you can always pause participation, and we're not going to adjust. It's like the emergency button. We're not the first ones to do this. There are precedents. Both were from Pacific Northwest National Lab. One was on the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State, and one was in Ohio. These showed the technology works for coordinating different devices. So we're not the first ones to do it. What we're trying to do is deploy it in a commercial sense. We're trying to create something that could scale across the state of Maine or nationwide. These are really research projects that were designed just to sort of intellectual exercise to see if it would work. The other difference is that we now, as Doug mentioned, we now have smartphones to help with this. And so it's just natural for us. We sort of expect to have this sort of interactive approach. And that's a difference that we're implementing. So we start, as I mentioned, by asking our participants to tell us how willing they are to be responsive. We do this through our app, which I hope you'll take a look at. We are integrating 4 different device types. So air conditioners and heat pumps through your thermostat, home storage batteries, if you have a battery, hot water heaters, heat pump water heaters. The old school electric resistive ones don't have enough intelligence to really participate in this. And then hopefully in the fall, we'll get to electric vehicles. We can't support all the makes and models of these different device types because we need to be able to understand what the state of the device is in order to provide this granular participation. We need to know how much hot water is in your water tank. We need to know how much energy is stored in your battery or in your car. We need to know what the set point is on your thermostat. And so having that two-way communication means that we can't talk to everything. There's some vendors that let us talk to them, their devices, and there's some that aren't. So we need to work that out with you as to what you have and whether it will work. We are going to offer some incentives. So we'll provide $200 as a thank you for joining and installing the equipment. It's modest equipment. I'll show you next slide. $100 per year for participating, answering our survey questions. And then we have a variable amount that represents the value that your flexibility has offered to the grid. That depends on the device type, depends on how willing you are to respond to the device conditions, and it depends on what the grid needs itself. If we just happen to have a very cold summer, then this may be lower. On the other hand, if we have a very hot summer, it may be higher. Now, that's a contrast to the conventional demand response approaches where the utility will often offer a set amount, but that's sort of the trade-off. In this case, you have this granular control over how you're participating in a way that you don't in the other programs. This is a slide showing the impact of your response choices on your device behavior and the variable incentives you can earn. It's actually kind of hard to read on the slide. It's hard to read on this screen, I have to be honest, but we have printouts that we can talk about after the talk if you have questions. So then to give you sort of a concrete example of how this would work, imagine that there's a hot, humid afternoon in Boston in early August. I focused on Boston because that's where the demand is greatest in icy New England. So imagine we have a hot, humid afternoon there. We're looking to coordinate consumption amongst 5 participants on a 15-minute interval. But Mike and Sarah, these are fictitious names, they've indicated that they have low and medium responsiveness, whereas David, Jennifer, and Chris all have high responsiveness. Mike and Sarah have a heat pump and an EV. They're requesting 4 kilowatts and 10 kilowatts in those intervals. David, Jennifer, and Chris have a heat pump for air conditioning, a battery, and a water heater, and they're requesting 4 kilowatts, 0 kilowatts in terms of the battery, and to consume, maybe it's fully charged, and half a kilowatt for the water heater. So because Mike and Sarah have indicated their responsiveness is low and medium, In this case, their devices would actually consume. So the air conditioner, Mike's air conditioner would keep the set point the same, and Sarah's EV would consume 10 kilowatts over that interval to charge up. But David, Jennifer, and Chris, because they've indicated high responsiveness, their devices will change their behavior. So David's heat pump, the set point will go up so that he's not consuming at that interval. Chris's water heater will not produce any more hot water in that 15-minute interval. And Jennifer's battery will discharge to the grid for 10 kilowatts. Hopefully we have more than 5, but that's to give you an example. Here's some more screenshots of the app. Another benefit of participating, for those of you who are interested, we will provide you through this interface real-time data as to what your devices are doing. So as now you sort of have to guess how much energy any of your devices is consuming. We can tell you in real time what it actually is, whether it's your air conditioner, we can tell you how much hot water is in your water heater, things like that. The equipment that we installed is quite modest. There's a miniature PC, which is on the upper left there. It's actually on the back. It's like this big. There's a sub-meter for the HVAC, which is also that big. And then the thermostats we would install look like this. We've learned that a lot of the mini split heat pumps in Maine use the IR remote controllers. So the approach we would take to manage those is to offer you this thermostat that looks in the bottom left column that looks about this big, and it mimics that controller, but it provides you with this thermostat-like functionality. So you can see what temperature you've set. It'll come with an app, things like that. And you don't have to remember where the remote is. So I don't have one of those remotes, but I would lose it. The only reason I can find my TV remotes is I have 2 little kids who always know where they are. And you can keep it. So then how would it work if you were to choose to participate? Well, the first step is to express interest. Go to our website by scanning this QR code, and we will take your contact information. Then we'll have a conversation with you to talk about your devices, answer any questions you have about the program, and go forward. And there's a formal enrollment. There's a research consent form to sign. We would install the equipment that I just showed. I'm not going to install it. Jay Shree's not going to install it. Beth's not going to install it. But we have some local installers we've talked to that have done these sorts of projects in the past, and they would actually do the installation. You download the app. We have an Android version or an Apple version. If you would like, we also will provide a tablet that you could mount on a wall or keep on a desk so that you can interface into MTEP without your phone. It's up to you. Then it's a 2-year project. So we'd have 1 year of participation. We'd ask you to complete a survey. If you want to go into year 2, then you could do that. And that would be it. And hopefully we would learn and advance the technology to a point where we could scale across Maine and nationwide. So to sum up, this is an opportunity for us to advance demand flexibility technology, receive some modest incentives, reduce stress on the grid, increase the use of low-cost solar and wind power. Thank you for your interest. I hope that you join us. Questions? Yeah. Yeah.
Pricing for the initial first 2 years, is that a representative of what the long-term pricing would be like, or is it kind of a, exaggerated,
It's a great question. Yeah, I do exactly what you're saying. So the 200 and 100 is that's just sort of because you're participating in this project. So that isn't really a long-term. The value to the grid, we are trying to price it comparable to what would be expected long-term. Right? There's no guarantee of that, but we're not setting it a factor of 10 higher to get people to respond. We're really trying to have it close because we want to know, is this something that could offer value to the grid, long-term? I mean, the analogy I like to point to is a lot of people don't want to give up their hot water for their shower, right? I wouldn't want to, but if someone was to pay me $1,000, I would skip a shower for a day for sure, right? But that's not scalable. So we want to set a time, or we want to set an amount that we could expect going forward. Yeah.
If you, some reason need to sell a house.
Yeah.
Between year 1 and year 2.
Yeah.
You have to give the equipment back?
No.
Pass it on to a new homeowner?
No, it's, you could pass it on, and if they choose to participate, that's great. If they don't choose to participate, that's fine too. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Just for
Yeah. 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 Sorry. Yeah.
I think you implied this, but all the equipment, is that provided
Yes.
free?
Yes. So we will provide all this little equipment. We will provide that at no cost to you. We'll pay for the installation. What we can't do is buy batteries or heat pumps or water heaters. Yeah. Yeah.
So I assume the point of this pilot is to prove that this technology works. And then I guess my question is, who do you have to convince that this is
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, so to the question is, who do we have to convince that it makes sense to get it to scale? So there's a variety of ways in which it could scale. It could be that a regulator or efficiency main trust or some other entity decides this is great value. Let's pay someone to operate it almost like flexibility as a service. So the question isn't so much, can we coordinate devices in this mechanism? That's been shown. The question really is, do we have enough confidence in that ability that you could substitute this for infrastructure investments? And so that's what we're trying to prove out, is how do people respond to that and what confidence does it have? No, but in Maine, it's an interesting place because you have, of course, the utilities, but then you have efficiency main trust, and then you have competitive suppliers. And any of those three parties could adopt this types of technology to meet grid needs. And you have ISO New England as well. Okay, yeah.
That slide, the Boston slide that showed the interconnected devices, all those things are hardwired except for the EV.
This one.
So how do you handle EVs? Does that mean if you want to participate with your EV, you have to plug it in all the time and you have to use a particular charging device?
You don't have, you could plug it in wherever you would like. This particular program would be tied to your charger. So you would, if you were to change the charging behavior in order to participate, it would be with the charger at your house. Yeah.
Certain brands?
And we can't support all the brands. That's right. Yeah.
So
We're developing a list. Yeah.
You said that's down the road, right?
We haven't, I say it's down the road because we haven't tried it yet. I mean, we haven't talked to a car and a charger yet. Yeah, but we're working on it.
batteries. The battery system in the house that you want to find in, you own a certain brand.
Yes, that's right.
I have a few.
Yeah.
How do you determine the value to the grid?
In part, that's because of what Efficiency Main Trust has set as the value that demand flexibility offers to the main grid. So we just take, their number and apply it accordingly. They have a whole calculation for why that number is the way it is based on the markets in ISO New England. But it's a good question. If you're trying to defer the investment, you almost have to amortize the deferring of that investment and try to then calculate that back to your device. It's tricky.
I have a few questions online. They're still asking you to repeat the question.
I'm sorry.
No worries. But I have one here. Could adding additional controls to any type of equipment potentially compromise a warranty, or is the device or everything external to the equipment?
So we're not modifying any equipment directly, and we're not changing the way that equipment, its internal controls. So we try to talk to the equipment at a very high level, a very abstract level. To give you an example of that, we're changing the set point on the heat pumps. We're not telling the heat pump mechanisms what to do, right? So it shouldn't have an impact on the warranty.
Are you offering this to just this community, or are you
through Maine to other.
Yeah.
communities?
The question is it open to anyone in Maine, or we're at different communities? So we were just at MDI yesterday. We're going to Norway tonight, and we've talked to York as well. So at least those four. In terms of what you would learn, we are open to anywhere in Maine. I think the limitation is Maine is a very big state. We've only talked to a few installers, and they're probably not going to travel everywhere in Maine. So the installers we've talked to are near Mount Desert Island and then down near Portland. So, whatever is a reasonable travel distance from those two locations is probably okay. Yeah.
What kind of reaction are you getting from utilities and grid operators?
Well, we have strong support here in Maine. You have unique sort of division of responsibilities between Efficiency Maine Trust, the utilities, and ISO New England. So I think the fact that Efficiency Maine Trust has been a supporter is important. We've talked to the Maine Governor's Energy Office, and they're also very supportive. We're also trying to deploy this in Memphis, and there we're talking to the municipal utility, and they're also very excited about it. So far, people are excited. I think the utilities recognize the value that load flexibility could provide. We don't know exactly how big that value is, but certainly it can provide value. What we found is that a lot of the utilities and these other stakeholders don't want to necessarily get into the nitty-gritty, going to people's houses, figuring out what devices, managing that communication. It's just not in their skill set. And so in some sense, we're filling that gap and that void between that nitty-gritty and the value that it can provide to the grid.
Who does the bookkeeping and writes the checks?
Bookkeeping is a good question. We'll have somebody do the bookkeeping. For this project, for the MTAP, Post-Road Foundation would issue the incentives directly to, and we could do electronic transfer. We could write a check. We've thought about gift cards. Yeah.
Just to get a feel for the company that you're representing, when do you expect the broadband to be completed?
Broadband in Memphis is going to take probably 5 years to be complete. We started developing it 2 or 3 years ago. Construction started about 6 months ago. I mean, it's 2,000 or 3,000 miles of fiber. It's a big effort. Yeah.
All the red tape that would have to go to get started is dealt with.
Yeah.
Yeah, both here and then on MDI, a lot of the housing stock is seasonal.
Yeah.
So is this open to?
See, it's open as seasonal. It's actually interesting. Say it again. I'm sorry.
Does that work out?
Yeah, it does. I mean, in some sense, seasonal can be a great value if you have maximum responsiveness when nobody's there, if it's in winter time. Yeah.
So will this help the utility increase capacity in a certain region? We've been told in some parts of the Blue Hill Peninsula that you can no longer add a solar array on your rooftop.
Right. I mean, MTEP itself is unlikely, because we're looking to enroll 100 participants, but the use case for the technology itself certainly could increase the capacity at what's called the feeder level. So that is one of the use cases. Now, this grid congestion, you can think about at the ISO New England level, all the New England states, so that transmission level, but you can also think about it down at the individual distribution circuit level, like the feeders that are here on this peninsula. So, if it was to work and people like it, and we were to deploy it to 10 or 20% of the buildings here, it could make a significant difference.
That would incentivize Versant to increase the amount of solar.
That would be the hope. Yeah, that would be the hope. Yeah.
I'm looking at a chart for electric vehicles.
Yeah.
And it says charging rate, so
Yeah.
it's like more reimbursement if there's a lower charging rate?
That's right, because that's the trade-off you're making, is if you're willing to let the charging rate to your vehicle go down, then we're compensating you for that change.
Wouldn't it be good to also have time to use? Like you were saying before, there are times when the grid just is not stressed.
Yeah. So time of use is an alternative to this approach, where you've set in advance, when the grid will be congested and when the grid will not be congested. on average, that works, but what it doesn't do is provide an opportunity to address unforecasted events. So if you have a heat wave or a cold spell that's more extreme than fits that time of use rate, the time of use rate doesn't really do much for you, whereas the approach that we're taking would be able to address those extreme events.
About what security, the devices will be connected through the internet.
Mhm.
And what type of security is in place that someone doesn't, there's vulnerabilities.
Yeah, so we would take it very seriously. There's a team at Pacific Northwest National Lab that evaluates our software from a cybersecurity perspective. We've hired students from, or not hired, but they're interns from Carnegie Mellon University to try to hack our software. And that's red team it to try to find the vulnerabilities, and then we fix the ones that they find. Everything's encrypted with industry standard approaches, and we have strict data segregation. So most of the operating software is not tied to what we call personally identifiable information. So there are very few people who can actually pair what your device is consuming and you as a person. That's a limited number of people who can do that. Most people just see, what we call your CPID, which doesn't, unless you can access the database that ties that, doesn't really tell you anything. Probably me and Jay Shree. Well, maybe Mayank too. So maybe the three of us. Yeah.
I just want to clarify, we have people in the audience tonight from Blue Hill, Sedgwick.
Yeah.
Brooksville.
Yeah.
As well as Brooklyn.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming this can be used, this can be participated in beyond this. Beyond Brooklyn.
Oh yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
Because I like the sound of my own voice.
Yeah. Yes, anyone in this part of Maine could participate for sure.
I have a question from the chat.
Yeah.
If someone is already enrolled in time of use rates with CMP or Versant, would that be a non-starter to enroll in this pilot?
So we haven't implemented that yet, but that doesn't mean it's not something that we would not welcome an opportunity to work with them on to implement. Yeah, we can do that. Yeah.
So you mentioned mini splits. When
Yeah.
You talk about heat pumps.
Yeah.
What about geothermal heat pumps?
Geothermal heat pumps are great if you're using a conventional 24-volt thermostat. We can replace it. If it's a proprietary thermostat for that particular
All my stuff is in the TechMar system.
Techmar, we'd have to look at it
Yeah.
carefully. That's why we need that one-on-one call.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't want to preclude it entirely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I participate if I don't have a cell phone?
Yeah, we'll give you a tablet.
You have to have Wi-Fi.
You have to have, well, no, actually, if you don't have broadband, we'll give you a cellular modem. Yeah, you could only use it for this. You couldn't use it for broadband, but it would allow you to connect even if you don't have broadband. Yeah. Yeah.
Did I hear you say, you're limiting it to 100 people, or you just hope to get 100 people, but you take more?
We need 100 participants in total in Maine. That's our aspiration. We'll certainly take more, but we don't have an unlimited budget. So 1,000 probably would be too many.
Okay.
But if we get 105, that's great. 150 would be great. Yeah.
Just to clarify on that last point.
Yeah.
Interesting. Live Zoom too, so
Yeah.
Like if I don't have Wi-Fi, what do I need to do? I have a phone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hotspot and whatever.
Yeah.
So can I just, do I need to get one of those tablets or what do I have to?
No, you don't. So what we will do is we'll give you a cellular modem that connects, to the cell phone network to provide internet access. Then we will connect that to this miniature PC, which we have on the back table through an Ethernet cable. And then we have the mini PC acts like a Wi-Fi hotspot, and that will then connect to your devices. Now you won't be able to use that cellular modem to watch Netflix, but you will be able to use it to participate. You are all very enthusiastic.
I have a question from the chat. Is solar that's exported to the grid of similar value to battery storage?
Solar, similar value devices. Yes and no. So the solar export to the grid is often correlated with the times of peak demand, in the summer, because usually when it's hot and humid, it's also sunny. And so that, in a sense, is a benefit to the grid, just like batteries. But the difference is that the battery allows you to store energy and put it in the grid when the grid needs it, whereas solar panels connected by themselves just put power on the grid when the sun is shining. So both are benefits to the grid, but the battery has additional flexibility. It's, if you go back to the road example, the battery is what lets you shift the cars to before or after rush hour. The solar might be, having all your kids picked up in a bus after school. So you've reduced the demand, but that only occurs at that time when the bus is running and your kids are getting out of school. So both are helpful, but different. Yeah.
You need to maintain a 24-hour connection to the internet in order for this to operate.
So if your internet connection goes down, your devices will revert back to their unconnected behavior. So they won't respond to grid conditions. They won't know anything. You wouldn't get, real-time telemetry on the app from the devices. And you wouldn't have the opportunity then to provide benefits to the grid. But it shouldn't impact, like, your water heater should work, your mini splits should work, and your battery should work, just as if it was never connected at all. Yeah.
So what happens when you have a power outage? Do you have to reset all this stuff?
It should reset all automatically and come back online by itself. So that's, what's that?
We never have those.
Yeah.
So I have all those devices in my house, and to me, it sounds like, it would seem to me the most useful would be the EV and the battery storage, but my assumption is that you're not gonna be able to access either of those because I have the evil Tesla battery, and I understand they're not playing with you guys. Is that correct?
Teslas are tricky. There might be some workarounds that we can implement, but Tesla is tricky. Yeah. Yeah. No, we're coming to learn that a lot of batteries that are deployed in Maine are Tesla batteries. So there's a lot of motivation for us to work out a workaround. The challenge on a workaround is you never really know how long that's going to work. Yeah. Yeah.
For those of us who might be thinking about a purchase of something like a battery,
Mm-hmm.
do you have lists of what suppliers you do support?
We have a lab in Oakland where we're actively testing different batteries.
Yeah.
We've effectively tested a battery from Duracell, that they make their batteries in San Jose, and those we can talk to very well.
Okay.
There's also an emerging standard called SunSpec Modbus for batteries, and we think that systems that support that standard will also be able to connect to, and that's something that we can help you identify.
Okay. And the same would be true of car chargers or?
Yeah.
Okay. And you would talk to the car charger, not to the EV?
The EVs are tricky because we need to know the state of charge in order to give you this personalized response. So the state of charge you can generally get from the car itself, and then we can control the charging rate through the charger. Now, it may be over the course of this project that the chargers will be able to get the state of charge from the car when they plug into the charger. And when that happens, then we only have to talk to the charger. But they're tricky.
Okay. And with EV charging, would it be that it's strictly about throttling it back when it's needed, or would it also employ a time of day?
Yeah.
Turn on at 2 in the morning or something like that.
It's more about when it's needed.
Yeah.
So because this is an alternative to time of use.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I have neither an EV or home battery storage, but this is for charging. You're not discharging.
We're not discharging to the grid. That's coming, but it's, maybe in the course of this project, we're able to do that. There's two problems, or there's two challenges that have to be overcome. One is that the charger in the car itself has to support feeding back to the grid. And there are chargers and cars, in the future, in the near future, probably like next year in 26, that will support that. The other challenge is that the utility has to allow it. I mean, there has to be an interconnection agreement that would allow you to discharge into the grid, just like your battery can discharge into the grid. So both of those challenges would have to be overcome.
I have a question from the chat. Is the Emporia level 2 charger that Efficiency Maine is promoting on your list of compatible chargers?
It is in our list of chargers to test. We have one in our lab.
If this is successful and scales up, does Post Road have a role beyond this, or is your role just to prove that this works?
Yeah, we're a nonprofit. It's our skill set is, and I hope, talking to you all, getting the technology to work, pushing it forward to a stage of commercialization. When it comes time to actually scale it out, we would probably either bring in special staff or license it out or send it out. But we're not doing this to write a research report or a paper. We want to create something that gets used going forward.
You know what the incentives still are with Efficiency Maine for batteries and?
I think their small battery program has stopped. The other incentives, I don't know off the top of my head. Now, Efficiency Maine Trust has asked that if you participate in one of their demand response programs, you not participate in this one, sort of as to prevent double dipping, so to speak, and to prevent sort of signals, crossing paths. But I think that the small battery program is not, my understanding is gone. So in some sense that is less of an issue for batteries. More reason for us to do Teslas.
We just add,
Yeah.
My incentive was in the form of a gift card, which I'm having trouble redeeming. So if you don't do gift cards, I would suggest that. That's very frustrating.
We're happy to mail checks.
Interference from solar panels.
No, your solar panels would operate independent. No, we don't have solar panels on this device list. That is because net metering, which most of you, if you have panels, you're probably participating in, net metering is almost certainly a better deal than what we could offer. And so it wouldn't be fair to you to try to enroll them. But long term, there's a lot of discussion about net energy metering in Maine and other parts of the country. Participating in a project like the technology we're deploying here will be an alternative that would be a way for solar panel owners to still earn revenue from the electricity that their panels are providing. But that's a longer term. Yeah.
Question that you alluded to a little bit earlier. What's in it for the utilities? They make a guaranteed profit for building out the grid.
That is correct. This is a tool that they can use to help manage their build out. Now, they will always prefer to put more copper in the ground or build bigger substations. There's not really any way around that under the current regulatory scheme. But if they're going, it would cost a lot of money to increase the size of the grid anywhere in this country by a factor of 3, right? That means the whole grid has to be 3 times bigger, 3 times more copper, 3 times more transmission lines, 3 times more substations. That's a lot. So, and that's in the context of electricity prices already going up. So although their economics, the regulatory model and their economics favors that build out, I don't think that the ratepayers, the energy consumers really are going to support that. So.
You don't know what that is for Maine specifically?
In which way?
How much additional copper would be?
Well, the peak load is expected to triple if we electrify. If we electrify heating and transport as aggressively as Maine would like to.
Is that chart specific to Maine?
This is Maine. Yeah, this is Maine. Yeah, this is from. Well, there was a Brattle report that I could send you. I think there's also a state government energy plan. And what's interesting also from this chart is you see that whereas now the winter and summer peaks are about the same, in the future, the winter peak would dominate. Because even though the climate will warm, you'll need air conditioning, it's still going to be very cold in Maine.
What role does the Maine PUC?
Maine PUC is not involved in this project directly. You could imagine whether it's the Maine PUC or a regulator or anywhere else, asking utilities to look at a project like, or the technology like this as an alternative to that capital build out. Now, there are some states that do require utilities to consider what are called non-wires alternatives or non-wires solutions. And you can think of this as a flavor of that. And so that would be a way for the regulators to push back against this economic incentive of just putting more copper in the ground. You sure you don't have any more questions?
Well, thanks to everyone for coming tonight. This has been very informative, and I hope we'll get some signups. We have some very light refreshments in the back. We invite people to stay and chat. We always learn a lot in our chats.
Yeah, well, thank you so much.